Welcome to the Pen Leader Podcast, where strategic leaders get straight to the topics, strengthening our awareness and sharpening our minds. The Pen Leader Podcast is produced by Roar, a production division of Mays & Associates Ltd. Find out more at www.maysassociatesltd.com. Now here is your award-winning host, Dr. Shanda Gore.
And welcome to another episode of the Pen Leader Podcast. This week's episode is Emotionally Intelligent Leadership. And I had the opportunity to present and meet a number of leaders at a recent conference and interview an expert who researches and shares insights in the area of emotional intelligence, specifically in those that lead organizations. This is my interview with Dr. Jennifer Laflam, who is the Dean of the Sacramento City Colleges and 2 outreach centers in Davis and West Sacramento, California. She has served as a Dean of Institutional Effectiveness and Innovation at American River College. She holds a bachelor's degree in American Studies from the University of California at Santa Cruz, a master's degree in education from Sacramento State, and a doctorate in higher education from Texas Tech University. Dr. Laflam's research explores feelings and emotional labor of those holding leadership positions. So, without further ado, Dr. Laflam, welcome.
Thank you. It's really nice to talk with you.
Yes, it's a wonderful time to talk with you. You know, you are an expert in this emotional intelligence component. And I know in the book, The Pen Leader Path, we talk about the 4 intelligence of concerning leaders. And emotional intelligence is the one that many individuals know the most about. But when you're a leader, sometimes that gets blurred on how that's defined. Can you define emotional intelligence for us?
Yeah, emotional intelligence from my perspective is really being aware of your context, so yourself, the emotions and feelings that you may bring to a situation, and also importantly, the context of the folks who you're working with or communicating with. So really understanding who you are in relationship with them, and then how they may feel about the topic at hand or whatever is going on.
Mm-hmm. Can you talk to when you're experiencing that emotional intelligence? Because we talk about self-awareness, and the most effective leaders are ones that are self-aware, knowing where your triggers are. And if you have a conflict that's happening with an employee or maybe with a customer, what would you advise, especially with that emotional intelligence component, for a leader to do?
Yeah, well, I really think it's useful to break it down into what's happening when you're feeling emotions in those situations. So I really look to Hochschild's theory of emotional labor, and she talks about how, we, especially in a corporate or leadership or educational setting, we have a goal, right? And in order to reach those goals, we may need to present with certain emotions, even if we're feeling something different underneath. She calls this surface acting. So I would say, a strategy is really to practice, to think through before you're in any of these situations, what are some of the things that could happen? And back to emotional intelligence, what might that bring up in me? I mean, we've all had experience. We pretty much know what it could bring up in me. And then literally, like, what am I going to do in that circumstance? Like, is it going to be strategic to show a little bit of that emotion? Or do I need to present differently in order to reach this goal? Which might be, keeping the folks you're talking to in the conversation. It might be actually moving the conversation to, an outcome that you're interested in or need to achieve. So yeah, I actually think like strategizing, thinking things through, visualizing, even practicing with partners, right? That would be one way to incorporate other people, like your allies or your colleagues, in this process, even if they're not in the room with you. And I'll just say one more thing. Another way to rely on those folks is actually to have the venting session. Like, save it. If you can't express it there, save it and express it in a safe space and work through the problems that obviously are there. Your emotions are valid. So
Mm-hmm.
anyway, that's a lot. I gave you a lot, but
No,
I
that's
think
pretty
those are
good.
some pretty clear strategies.
Well, I think about individuals who are having full blown conversations in their cars.
Yeah.
Yes, the cars where it used to be where you could see somebody talking, they're talking to themselves. Now you don't know if they're talking on a phone
Right.
or through, but talking through, and it sounds like even possibly role playing is
Yep.
what you're saying, finding with someone. So unfortunately, sometimes spouses or partners get part of that, right?
Very true.
All right.
Or kids.
Our kids. Let's go through that. Talk to me about, for those that are leaders that have customers that are hoping to save relationships, but they have to deliver news that may not be the best or communicate a subject. Maybe it's a new way of dealing with business, or maybe it's payment, because it is triggering. It could be triggering for an emotion, especially if it's a challenge. How do you advise that when there's a power piece that's in play?
Good point. Well, I think it's really important to relate with that person's emotion. So again, being aware of that power difference, that you come into the conversation with more power than the person you're giving this bad news to. So you're not assuming that you understand everything that they're going through. I think that's important to keep aware of, but also to acknowledge the feelings that this conversation might bring up. Just saying, listen, this is I think this is going to be a hard conversation. This is how I feel going into it. Please let me know. Here's the news. What's this bringing up for you? I think keeping those emotions like transparent can be helpful. And then also that person feels seen and heard. And then, of course, they're going to want action afterwards. So moving to it, like you might have hard news, but what can you do to support the person getting to that point, or support the person despite this rough decision?
What would you advise with leaders that are conflict avoidance?
Oh,
They're really not comfortable with the conflict.
yeah.
Yes.
Well, it's back to practice. I come from a conflict avoidant family, right? Many people do, but I think a couple things. One, trying to reframe conflict. Like, conflict does not have to be bad. We cannot grow without conflict. So conflict is not necessarily a disaster or a negative thing. It can lead to change that can be good. So reframing it for yourself is helpful. And then back to that emotional intelligence, being aware of the emotions that are going to come up when you do encounter conflict or cause conflict. It's not going to be easy, right? You're going to feel that flutter up in your chest and your throat tightening. So anticipate that and have some actual physical strategies. Take a breath. Take a moment. You don't have to rush into it. And then, that said, back to the kind of role playing thing, go ahead and practice it. Practice it with someone. And then the more you do it, the easier it gets.
I think so too. I think that if you can get through one or two, I would say wins, but positive on the other side, and still have a situation where it's resolved, it may not always be a win-win for everyone. Meaning that, again, the news, and it also takes time for it to digest. I need to process what is occurring.
Right.
And so I do ask leaders and those that I coach to really think through, take a moment. You do not feel obligated to have to answer at that point. If you're needing
That's great
to have that moment of like, well, I need an answer to, that's not what's happening. And say, let me think about what you just said, and let's meet again.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, agree.
I think it's important to do that, but I also think of it as too, for those that are avoiding, that just they'd skip around, or they make themselves unhappy. And again, going back to the emotional side, by going along with whatever has been put on the table, because they're trying to avoid conflict.
Yep. Yes.
And so they're unhappy. Concerning recruitment and retention, especially of workforce, and as the next generation come out of college and go into workforce, or those that are professionals that are going back to obtain education for the credentials or moving into a different career. A
Mm-hmm.
lot of that's happening. What would you advise if faced with going into an interview where there might be a trigger that happens and you're attempting to get a job?
Mm-hmm.
What would you say for those that are out there eagerly trying to obtain a job or position?
First of all, I just want to acknowledge interviews are hard. They're just very hard. They're time to find. Our nerves are up, and we know that that short circuits like the parts of our brain that can help us in these situations. So it's one thing to think about is if you do encounter those moments where you're triggered or frozen, it's not just you, right? You're not the problem. Like, it is, the context is difficult. So give yourself a break. But in the moment, just to your previous advice about slowing down, again, you do have the flip side of that time to find is it's your time. So if you need to ask the panel or the interview, you know what, let me just take a breath and think back through this question. I have an answer, but I just need a bit of time, and take those few breaths and answer as best that you can. Again, it's just being aware of what might come up for you when you go in, thinking through what your strategies are going to be, because when you're in that situation, it will be hard to access them, so you want to make them habit. Yeah, I think that's those things. Again, it's hard, but it's can be expected that folks stumble. And I think remembering the interviewer is not necessarily going to hold that against you, Yeah.
Excellent. I talk about emotional intelligence in my book, and I talk about intrapersonal intelligence, interpersonal, again with relationship, the understanding and being self-aware, and the last one, artificial intelligence. Do you come across an emotional responses when you're talking with individuals, even when talking about technology? How and what do you advise individuals who are coming across technologies that they're either expected to learn now that may be tied to their jobs, and they're expected to be more efficient? What would you advise for those individuals on how to react on that, knowing that there's the surface, what's internally happening, and then how they project? Happy, sad, concerned. What emotions would you advise leaders who may be faced with some of these challenges?
Leaders that are experiencing that themselves or experiencing that in their employees?
Experiencing that themselves. Many of them are leaders, and their employees are watching them.
Yes. Well, I think like one piece of advice I would give is for them to approach that situation with humility. Technology can be its own type of scary or unknown, but every learning challenge that all of us have had can be scary and unknown. So, learning about using a new technology is like learning about anything different. How do you approach that? With some humility. I don't know about this yet. But importantly, especially for a leader, really being transparent about these are the steps that I'm going to take to get there, or these are the steps we're going to take to get there, I think can kind of dissipate that emotion, right? I think we get those anxious emotions when we feel like we need to fit into a boundary that's just impossible to fit into. So again, it's kind of giving yourself a break and remembering the human side of this learning process.
Excellent. So now here's my fun questions for you, because I know you read so much. What are you reading and what are you watching?
Oh, what am I reading and what am I watching?
Yes.
Well, honestly, I read when I read for pleasure, it's truly pleasure. It's like frivolous books. And part of that is, work is challenging and hard, right? And I need to have good sleep. And so when I, really entertain myself before going to bed, doing that kind of reading, it's just a way to kind of keep my emotional health healthy. In terms of watching, I mean, I'm a sucker for like the big, HBO TV shows like The Last of Us and White Lotus and stuff like that. And honestly, that's more, I don't do that alone. I do that with my partner. So again, back to emotional health, like we're so busy in a day. If we can find some time to have fun with, the people you're closest to, that's really the mechanism that watching stuff has for me. So
Excellent,
yeah.
excellent. Where there's no judgment on frivolous. I like frivolous too. And I think that that's one thing we talk about leaders with resetting themselves
Oh yeah.
and having that time to not always be concentrated in whatever the field they are, to take a break. The
Right.
step back is so important.
Yeah, totally agree.
To be able to, to be aware, but
Mhm.
actually to give, even sometimes you'd be surprised what you find in the frivolous that could help, maybe start a creative idea
Yeah,
somewhere. So,
that's right.
so I appreciate your time. I
Thank
can't thank you enough
you.
for this opportunity to sit down with you and to hear you speak at the conference. So thank you so very much.
You're welcome. It's been really fun. Good to meet you.
And it was wonderful interviewing her and catching her perspective and her research that she has found over a period of years in working with leaders and helping them get on the other side of that emotional response. We also like to thank our sponsor for supporting the show, Realtor Shannon Roof of Berkshire Hathaway Home Services, Kohler Realty, educating clients so they feel confident in their decisions and at the closing table. Thank you so much, Shannon. And don't forget to pick up a copy of The Pen Leader Path, Identify, Engage, and Develop Effective Human and AI Leadership for Your Organizational Culture. It's out in ebook, paperback, hardcover, through Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, and wherever books are sold. So thank you so much for your support for that. And, of course, until next time.
The Pen Leader podcast is hosted by Dr. Shanda Gore and brought to you by Mays & Associates Ltd., creating customized solutions for growth in the areas of leadership development, strategic planning, and culture building. Find out more at www.maysassociatesltd.com. Don't forget to subscribe to the Pen Leader podcast and share with others.